Standing at my boss's funeral in the pouring rain, his daughter Jessica handed me a termination letter and said the company was moving in a new direction, one that didn't include me after 8 years of loyal service. What she didn't know was that her father had made me the only person who could save their biggest contract, and her arrogance was about to cost her everything. My name is Michael, and I never thought I'd be holding my termination letter at my boss's funeral. Richard Morrison had been like a father to me for 8 years, teaching me everything about running Morrison Manufacturing from the ground up. I started as a warehouse worker fresh out of community college, drowning in student debt, and he saw something in me that nobody else did. The rain kept falling as mourners walked away from the gravesite, but Jessica Morrison grabbed my arm before I could leave. She was Richard's only daughter, 28 years old with a shiny MBA and exactly 3 months of experience in her father's company. Her designer funeral dress probably cost more than most of our workers made in a week. "Michael, we need to discuss your future with the company," she said, her voice cutting through the sound of raindrops on umbrellas. I followed her to the parking lot, thinking she wanted to talk about keeping things running smooth during this difficult time. Our biggest client, Henderson Industries, had a contract renewal meeting scheduled for next week. Richard had spent months preparing for it, and I knew every detail by heart. Instead, Jessica pulled out an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. "This is your termination notice, effective immediately." I stared at the paper, water spots already forming on the official letterhead. "Jessica, there has to be some mistake. The Henderson contract needs to be renewed by Friday, or we lose 60% of our business." She crossed her arms and looked at me like I was bothering her at the worst possible moment. "The company is moving in a new direction. We need fresh leadership, not old-fashioned management styles that held my father back." My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Richard trusted me with the Henderson relationship. They specifically asked to work with me on the renewal. "Well, they'll have to work with me now," she snapped. "I'm the owner and I make the decisions. Your services are no longer needed." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. 8 years of working nights and weekends, of learning every machine in the factory, of building relationships with clients and suppliers. Richard had promised me a promotion to operations director after the Henderson renewal. Now his daughter was throwing it all away at his funeral. "Your father believed in me," I said quietly. Jessica's eyes went cold. "My father's dead. I run Morrison Manufacturing now, and I don't need some college dropout telling me how to do business." She turned and walked back toward the funeral reception, leaving me standing in the rain with my termination letter. But as I watched her go, something didn't feel right about the timing. Why fire me today, at the funeral, unless she was planning something she didn't want me to interfere with? I drove home in silence, but my mind was racing. Richard had always been careful about protecting the company, especially after we had that embezzlement problem 2 years ago. He'd put safety measures in place, backup plans that even I had forgotten about. Monday morning hit me like a freight train when my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. The first call was from Dave Henderson himself, the CEO of our biggest client. His voice sounded worried, which immediately put me on edge. "Michael, I'm sorry to hear about Richard. He was a good man and a reliable partner," Dave said. "But I need to ask you something important. Jessica Morrison came to see me Friday afternoon, said she was taking over all client relationship. Problem is, she couldn't answer basic questions about our quality requirements." I sat up straighter in my kitchen chair, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lip. "What kind of questions?" "Technical specs for the Henderson 2000 series, delivery schedules, our defect tolerance levels. Stuff you and Richard knew by heart. She kept saying she'd get back to me with answers." My stomach dropped. Those weren't details you could look up in a file. They came from years of working directly with Henderson's engineers, understanding their production needs, building trust through consistent delivery. "Dave, what exactly did she tell you about the renewal?" "That's just it, Mike. She seemed to think it was automatic, like we had no choice but to stay with Morrison. But between you and me, we've been getting calls from competitors. If we don't see the same level of service Richard provided, we might have to explore other options. After Dave hung up, my phone immediately rang again. This time it was Tom Bradley, our plant foreman, and he sounded panicked. "Michael, thank God you answered. Jessica's here at the factory demanding we change our production schedule for Henderson. She wants us to cut quality control steps to save money. I told her that would violate our contract specifications, but she said she knows better than some high school graduate." I closed my eyes and rubbed my forehead. Tom had worked at Morrison for 15 years and knew our processes better than anyone. He'd also been specifically trained on Henderson's requirement. "Tom, don't change anything yet. Give me an hour to figure this out." The calls kept coming. Our lead accountant wanted to know why Jessica was asking about Henderson's payment terms, information she should have already known. Our shipping coordinator was confused about new delivery instructions that made no sense. Even Jessica's own assistant called, whispering that the office was complete chaos. By noon, I realized what was happening. Jessica didn't just fire me to prove she was in charge. She actually believed she could run complex client relationships with nothing but an MBA and her father's last name. She had no idea how much detailed knowledge and relationship building went into keeping major contracts. But I remembered something Richard had told me after the embezzlement incident. He'd made changes to protect the company, backup systems in case something happened to him. I dug through my files and found the folder marked Henderson Account Authorization. There it was, buried in legal paperwork I'd signed 2 years ago and forgotten about. Richard had made me a backup signatory with full authority to negotiate and bind contracts for Henderson Industries. It was his insurance policy, designed to protect the company if key personnel were unavailable. Jessica didn't know this document existed. She'd fired me thinking she could simply take over all client relationships by virtue of being the owner. But legally, I was still the only person authorized to finalize the Henderson renewal. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, "Need to talk. Come to the office immediately." I smiled for the first time since the funeral and typed back, "I'm no longer employed by Morrison Manufacturing. You'll need to schedule an appointment." Jessica showed up at my apartment door at 3 in the afternoon, and I could see the desperation written all over her face. Her perfectly styled hair was messy, her expensive suit wrinkled, and she kept checking her phone like it was about to explode. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, trying to sound authoritative but failing completely. "There's been a misunderstanding about your termination." I leaned against my doorframe and crossed my arms. "No misunderstanding, Jessica. You made it crystal clear at your father's funeral that my services weren't needed." She pushed past me into my living room without being invited, which told me just how panicked she really was. Rich people don't usually barge into other people's homes unless they're drowning. "Look, I may have acted too quickly," she said, pacing back and forth across my carpet. "I was emotional, grieving. You have to understand the pressure I'm under. I understand you called me a college dropout and said I was holding your father back." Her face went red, but she kept talking. "Henderson Industries called this morning. They're threatening to pull their contract unless they can work directly with you. That's impossible because you don't work for us anymore." I sat down on my couch and watched her squirm. "Sounds like a problem you'll need to solve with your MBA skills. Don't be difficult, Michael. The Henderson contract is worth $4 million annually. Without it, Morrison Manufacturing will have to lay off 60 people, including workers you trained personally." That hit me where she knew it would. I genuinely cared about the factory workers, many of whom had families depending on their paycheck. But I wasn't about to let her emotional manipulation work. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Jessica stopped pacing and pulled out a folder from her briefcase. I'm offering you your job back, with a 20% raise and a promise that you'll have full authority over the Henderson relationship. I looked at the paperwork she was waving around. You mean the authority I already had before you fired me? This is different. It's in writing, with legal guarantees. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, leaving her standing there clutching her folder. Jessica, you seem to think this is a negotiation between equals. But you fired me 3 days ago for no reason other than proving you were in charge. She followed me, her voice getting higher and more desperate. Name your price then. Whatever you want. Salary, benefits, title, office space. Just come back and save the Henderson deal. I turned around and looked at her directly. You really don't understand what's happening here, do you? What do you mean? Your father didn't just trust me with client relationships. He made sure I could protect the company even if something happened to him. Even if his daughter made terrible decisions. The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? I pulled out the Henderson authorization document and set it on my kitchen counter. 2 years ago, after the embezzlement incident, your father made me a backup signatory for the Henderson account. I don't just know their requirements and preferences. I'm legally authorized to negotiate and finalize their contracts. Jessica grabbed the document and read it frantically, her hands shaking. This can't be legal. I own the company now. You own the company, but you don't own the relationships your father built. And you definitely don't own me. Wednesday morning brought a phone call that would shift the entire balance of power between Jessica and me. Dave Henderson's voice was calm but firm when he delivered news that sent shockwaves through Morrison Manufacturing. Michael, I've made a decision about our contract renewal, he said. After meeting with Jessica twice this week, Henderson Industries has serious concerns about Morrison's current leadership and quality control standards. I sat forward in my chair, notepad ready. What kind of concerns, Dave? She presented us with a cost-cutting proposal that would reduce quality inspections by 40%. When our engineers explained why that wouldn't work for our specifications, she insisted we were being too picky. She actually said we should trust her business judgment over our technical requirements. My jaw dropped. Jessica was trying to change fundamental aspects of our service delivery without understanding why those procedures existed in the first place. There's more, Dave continued. She brought in some consultant yesterday who suggested we could save money by switching to cheaper raw materials. This consultant had never worked in our industry and couldn't answer basic questions about metal fatigue or stress testing. I rubbed my forehead, feeling genuinely worried about the company's future. Dave, what can I do to help fix this situation? Here's what I'm proposing. Henderson Industries wants to continue our partnership, but only if you're directly involved in account management. We're willing to work with Morrison Manufacturing, but we need guarantees that you'll oversee our contract personally. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Jessica's car in my driveway, along with 2 other vehicles I didn't recognize. Dave, can I call you back in an hour? I think Jessica's here with reinforcements. I opened the door to find Jessica standing with 2 men in expensive suits. One was older, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that screamed corporate lawyer. The other was younger, maybe 40, carrying a briefcase and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Michael, this is Robert Fletcher from Fletcher & Associates, Jessica said, gesturing to the older man. He's our corporate attorney. And this is Mark Stevens, our new operations consultant. I stepped aside to let them in, curious about what kind of show Jessica was planning to put on. Fletcher immediately took charge of the conversation. Mr. Michael, my client is prepared to offer you a very generous package to return to Morrison Manufacturing. We're talking about a 40% salary increase, profit sharing, and executive benefits. I looked at the consultant, who was fidgeting with his briefcase and avoiding eye contact. Mark, what's your background in manufacturing? Well, I have an MBA from Northwestern, and I've done operational consulting for several companies in the service sector. Service sector, I repeated. Ever worked with metal fabrication? Quality control systems? Industrial safety protocols? His face went red. Not specifically, but business principles are universal. I turned to Fletcher. Robert, I assume Jessica explained the Henderson authorization document to you? The lawyer's confident expression flickered for just a moment. We believe that document may not be legally binding given the change in company ownership. I walked to my desk and pulled out a second folder I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Actually, I had our mutual friend at Henderson Industries review the authorization with their legal team yesterday. They confirmed it's completely valid and binding. Jessica's face went white. What mutual friend? Dave Henderson called this morning. He's decided that Henderson Industries will only renew their contract if I personally manage their account. Not as your employee, but as an independent contractor with full decision-making authority. Fletcher and Stevens exchanged worried glances while Jessica started pacing again. Here's what I'm proposing, I continued, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. I'll form my own consulting company. Morrison Manufacturing will be my first client, and I'll handle the Henderson renewal as an independent contractor. What would that cost? Fletcher asked carefully. I smiled and pulled out the contract I'd been preparing. $100,000 for saving the Henderson account, plus ongoing consulting fees for any additional work Jessica needs help with. Jessica's mouth fell open. $100,000? That's insane. Jessica, Henderson's contract is worth $4 million annually. Losing it would cost Morrison 60 jobs and probably bankruptcy within 6 months. My fee represents 2.5% of the value I'm saving. Fletcher studied my contract proposal, his lawyer brain clearly calculating the costs and benefit. This is highly unusual, but given the circumstances. There's one more condition, I added. I want a formal apology from Jessica, acknowledging that firing me was a mistake and that she acted without understanding the full scope of my responsibilities. Jessica looked like she wanted to crawl under my coffee table. Stevens was writing furiously in his notepad, probably documenting the disaster his first consulting assignment had become. Fine, Jessica whispered. I apologize. I made a mistake. I shook my head. Not to me, Jessica. To the employees at Morrison Manufacturing. They deserve to know why their jobs were almost lost and how we're fixing the situation. The room fell silent except for the sound of Fletcher's pen scratching across legal documents. The Henderson Industries conference room fell completely silent when I finished presenting our 3-year renewal proposal, and I could see Jessica's hands trembling as she waited for their response. We'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment, but what happened next would determine whether Morrison Manufacturing survived or collapsed. Dave Henderson leaned back in his leather chair, studying the contract documents spread across the mahogany table. His engineering team had grilled us for 3 hours about quality specifications, delivery schedules, and cost projections. Jessica had tried to contribute several times, but her suggestions showed she still didn't understand the technical requirement. Michael, this proposal addresses every concern we discussed, Dave said finally. The quality control improvements, the expanded testing protocols, the delivery guarantees. This is exactly what Henderson Industries needs for our next phase of growth. I nodded professionally, but inside I felt a surge of satisfaction. Richard had taught me that successful negotiations weren't about winning or losing, they were about creating solutions that made everyone successful. However, Dave continued, and Jessica's face went pale, we have some additional requirements that weren't in the original contract. He pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before and slid it across the table. Henderson Industries is expanding into 3 new markets next year. We'll need a manufacturing partner who can handle increased volume, specialized products, and international quality certifications. I opened the folder and felt my heart skip a beat. The projected order volume was triple our current capacity. The technical specifications required equipment and expertise Morrison didn't currently possess. The timeline demanded delivery capabilities we couldn't meet with our existing setup. Jessica cleared her throat nervously. Mr. Henderson, Morrison Manufacturing has always been able to adapt to your needs. Dave's expression remained neutral, but I could tell he was testing us. These aren't adaptations, Ms. Morrison. This would require significant capital investment, additional facilities, specialized training for your workforce. We're talking about transforming your entire operation. I studied the requirements carefully, my mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just a contract renewal anymore. Henderson was offering us a chance to become their primary manufacturing partner for a massive expansion, but only if we could prove we were serious about growth. What kind of timeline are we looking at for these capabilities? I asked. 6 months for the basic infrastructure, 12 months for full certification and production capacity, Dave replied. And we'd need financial guarantees that Morrison can handle the investment without compromising quality or delivery on existing contracts. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I could see her doing quick mental calculations and realizing the same thing I was. Morrison Manufacturing didn't have the capital reserves for this kind of expansion. Gentlemen, could you give us a moment to discuss this privately? I asked. After Henderson's team left the conference room, Jessica turned to me with panic in her eyes. Michael, we can't afford this. The company doesn't have $2 million for equipment upgrades and facility expansion. I leaned back in my chair, watching her squirm. Jessica, what did you do with the capital reserves your father left? Her face went red. I made some investments. Office renovations, consultant fees, marketing initiatives. I was trying to modernize the company. How much is left in the expansion fund Richard set aside? She looked down at her hands. About $400,000. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. Your father saved for 3 years to build up those reserves. He specifically told me they were for growth opportunities like this. I didn't know Henderson was going to offer something this big. That's exactly why your father saved the money, Jessica. For opportunities you couldn't predict. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Henderson's manufacturing floor. Watching their efficient operation reminded me of what Morrison could become with the right leadership and investment. There's another option, I said slowly. Jessica looked up hopefully. What kind of option? I've been building relationships with other clients since becoming an independent contractor. 3 companies have approached me about manufacturing partnership. If we combine those contracts with Henderson's expansion, we'd have enough guaranteed revenue to secure financing for the upgrades. Her eyes widened. You've been talking to other companies behind my back? I turned around to face her. I've been doing my job, Jessica. Building business relationships, identifying opportunities, protecting the future of Morrison Manufacturing. You know, the things your father hired me to do 8 years ago. She sat quietly for a long moment, and I could see her finally understanding the scope of what her father had built and what she'd almost destroyed. What would you need from me? She asked finally. Full authority to negotiate all manufacturing contracts, not just Henderson. A formal partnership in the business, not just a consulting arrangement. And a commitment that you'll focus on learning the business instead of trying to prove you already know everything. Jessica stared at the Henderson proposal, then looked up at me with something that might have been respect for the first time since her father's funeral. Michael, I need to ask you something honestly. Do you think I can actually learn to run this company? I sat back down across from her. Your father believed you could, or he wouldn't have left it to you. But believing you can do something and actually doing it are 2 different things. It takes time, humility, and a willingness to listen to people who know more than you do. Before she could respond, Dave Henderson knocked on the conference room door. Ready to continue our discussion? I looked at Jessica, waiting for her decision. She took a deep breath and nodded. Mr. Henderson, I said as his team returned, Morrison Manufacturing accepts your expansion proposal. We'll need 90 days to finalize financing and begin infrastructure development, but we're committed to meeting your timeline. Dave smiled and extended his hand. Excellent. I'll have our legal team prepare the contracts. As we shook hands, I caught Jessica watching me with a mixture of admiration and something that looked like relief. For the first time since Richard's death, Morrison Manufacturing had a real future. 6 months later, I stood in the newly expanded Morrison Manufacturing facility, watching Jessica give a presentation to our workforce about safety protocols and quality standards, and I barely recognized the woman who had fired me at her father's funeral. She spoke confidently about production metrics, answered technical questions from experienced workers, and demonstrated an understanding of our processes that had taken months of dedicated learning to develop. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Jessica had spent countless hours on the factory floor, shadowing experienced workers and asking questions that revealed how much she didn't know about her father's business. She'd swallowed her pride, admitted her mistakes, and slowly earned the respect of people who had initially viewed her as an entitled rich kid playing CEO. "Michael, can I see you in the office?" she called out after finishing her presentation. I followed her to what used to be Richard's office and was now officially ours to share. The walls were covered with charts showing production capacity, client contracts, and financial projections that would have made Richard proud. Morrison Manufacturing had not only survived Jessica's initial incompetence, but had grown into something bigger and stronger than before. "The Henderson expansion is ahead of schedule," Jessica said, settling behind the desk with quarterly reports spread out in front of her. "Their quality audits came back with perfect scores, and they're already talking about additional contracts for next year." I nodded, reviewing the financial statements that showed profits up 200% from the previous year. The other manufacturing partnerships are performing well too. Miller Industries wants to expand their contract, and we have 3 new prospects scheduled for site visits next month. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of her father. "I need to tell you something, Michael. I found another letter from Dad last week, hidden in his safe deposit box." She handed me an envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. "Michael," it read, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me and Jessica is probably struggling to run the company. I know my daughter has potential, but she's never been tested by real adversity. She's going to make mistakes, probably big ones, and she might even fire you before she realizes what she's doing. When that happens, remember that protecting Morrison Manufacturing means protecting her too, even when she doesn't deserve it. You're the son I never had and the leader this company needs. Help her become the leader she can be, but don't let her destroy what we built together. The backup authorizations and financial safeguards I've put in place will give you the tools you need. Use them wisely. Richard." I looked up at Jessica, who was watching my face carefully as I read. "When did you find this?" 2 days after I signed the partnership agreement making you co-owner," she said quietly. "At first I was angry, thinking Dad had planned everything, including my failure. But then I realized he wasn't planning for me to fail. He was planning for me to succeed, eventually, with your help." I folded the letter and set it on the desk between us. "Your father was a smart man, Jessica. He understood that success isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning from them and becoming stronger." She smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine rather than calculated. "I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "Henderson Industries just offered us a 5-year exclusive manufacturing contract worth $20 million annually. But there's a condition. They want Morrison Manufacturing to open a second facility on the West Coast, which would require a major expansion of our operations. I raised my eyebrows. That's a huge opportunity, but also a huge risk. Which is why I think we should take it, Jessica said, pulling out architectural plans and financial projections. But this time, I want us to plan it together from the beginning. No surprise decisions, no assumptions about what the other person knows. Full partnership on every major decision. I studied the expansion plans, seeing possibilities and challenges that would require every bit of experience and wisdom Richard had taught me. This would make Morrison Manufacturing one of the largest independent manufacturers in the region. It would also honor everything Dad built while creating something new that's ours, Jessica added. I thought about the journey from that rainy funeral day to this moment. Jessica had gone from an entitled MBA graduate who fired people at funerals to a business leader who understood the value of experience, relationships, and hard work. She'd earned the respect of our workers, the trust of our clients, and gradually, my forgiveness for the way she'd treated me. Partners? I asked, extending my hand. She shook it firmly. Partners. But I still expect you to tell me when I'm being stupid. I laughed. Jessica, that's what partners do for each other. Looking around the office that Richard had built and we had transformed, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond business success. Jessica had learned that real leadership comes from serving others, not from exercising power over them. She'd discovered that respect is earned through competence and character, not inherited through family connections. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone who wronged you. Sometimes it's helping them become the person they were meant to be all along, while building something bigger and better than what existed before. Richard would have been proud of both of us.